On March 12, 2003, Lena Morel, a 29-year-old nurse, clocked out of St. Agnes Hospital just after 10:15 p.m. Security footage showed her leaving through the south entrance, raincoat buttoned, hair damp from the spring drizzle. She waved goodnight to the night clerk and crossed the dimly lit parking lot to her silver sedan. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Some stories don't end. They fade like footprints in the rain. At 10:48 p.m., a motion-activated porch camera on Maple Hollow Road caught Lena's headlights sweeping across her driveway. The image, blurred by rain, showed her stepping from the car, keys in hand, her white hospital shoes glinting under the light. Inside the house, the living room lamp was still on. Evan Morel, her husband of 5 years, later claimed he had fallen asleep on the couch. He said he woke to the sound of the front door closing, called out her name once, and heard nothing back. When he got up a few minutes later, Lena was gone. Police arrived within the hour after Evan's 911 call. The scene was unsettling in its neatness. Lena's purse sat open on the kitchen counter, wallet and phone inside. A mug of tea waited beside the kettle, steam still faintly rising. The back door was locked from the inside, windows latched, no footprints on the porch except hers. The car keys hung on the wall hook, routine, deliberate. Only one thing was missing, her wedding ring, normally kept on a ceramic tray near the sink. Detective Cal Weaver, newly transferred from the city, described the house as eerily paused, like a life left mid-sentence. He noted the small details. The radio left playing static, a half-folded blanket on the sofa, the scent of lavender hand cream still lingering in the hall. Nothing suggested a struggle or break-in. There was no sign of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no marks on the floor. Just absence, precise, quiet, impossible. Neighbors told officers they'd seen Lena return home, but hadn't noticed anyone else. One man, Arthur Hayes, claimed he heard the low hum of an engine idling near the Morrow property around 11 p.m., but couldn't tell if it was passing traffic or something parked nearby. Another neighbor said she saw lights flicker inside the house close to midnight. Power surge, maybe? Maybe not. By morning, news vans crowded the narrow street. Ashbury Creek was not the kind of town that drew headlines. Rows of modest clapper houses framed by cedar trees. The kind of place where everyone waved, everyone gossiped, and nothing terrible ever happened. The Morel disappearance changed that overnight. Evan appeared distraught in early interviews. His voice trembled as he pleaded, "If anyone saw anything, please just call the police." Yet his composure unsettled some. He remembered the times, the sequence, the smallest objects, but when asked what Lena wore when she came home, he hesitated. Her uniform, I think, or maybe jeans. She might have changed at work. The following day, search dogs traced her scent only as far as the backyard gate. Beyond that, nothing. Detectives expanded the perimeter, checked nearby woods and riverbanks. They found a discarded shoe print near the edge of the property, half washed by rain, size unknown. It didn't match Evans. At the hospital, co-workers described Lena as calm, steady, meticulous. No signs of depression, no recent arguments. But one colleague recalled her acting distracted that week, pausing mid-shift to jot something in a small notebook she kept in her pocket. That notebook was never found. When the first press conference ended, Detective Weaver stood outside under the drizzle, staring at the house that looked perfectly ordinary under its porch light. "Sometimes," he murmured to a junior officer, "the quietest houses hide the loudest stories." He couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been waiting for Lena to come home. Later that night, technicians re-examined the porch camera footage. In the final frame before it cut out, Lena paused at the doorstep, turning her head slightly, as if hearing a sound from inside. Then static. No entry, no exit, no movement after that. The official timeline would later state, 10:48 p.m., Lena arrives home. 10:53 p.m., all signs of life cease. 5 minutes. That's all it took for a woman's existence to vanish between one raindrop and the next. The file labeled Morel Lena. Missing person would remain open for months. Then as a whisper, but heavy enough to haunt every officer who touched it. And though the investigation would grow colder with each passing season, one small, ordinary absence, a missing wedding ring, would outlast them all. She got home at 10:48 p.m. By 10:53, Lena Morel was gone forever. Morning broke gray and cold over Ashbury Creek the day after Lena's disappearance. The mist clung to rooftops, and the sound of boots on wet grass echoed across the neighborhood as officers began their first coordinated search. Word spread fast, faster than facts could catch up. By noon, volunteers lined the sidewalks holding thermoses and flyers printed on borrowed office paper. Missing, Lena Morel, 29. Detective Cal Weaver stood at the edge of the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, watching the quiet army of townspeople move through the trees. He'd been on dozens of missing person cases, but something about this one felt too tidy, too practiced. The husband's account was clean, almost rehearsed. Weaver had learned to trust the things people didn't say, the pauses between their words. The search began with the obvious: wooded trails behind the property, the drainage ditches along County Road 7, and the shallow bend at Hickory Creek. Dogs picked up Lena's scent near her back gate, the same point where the prints had been found, then lost it beyond the property line. Rain from the previous night had washed away most tracks, but Weaver marked the spot anyway. "Everything leaves something," he murmured. By the third day, the Ashbury Volunteer Fire Department joined the effort. Helicopters traced grid lines across the forest canopy, while divers dragged the creek, their fluorescent buoys bobbing like small ghosts. Nothing surfaced. Not a shoe, not a scrap of fabric, not a single trace of Lena Morel. At the Morel house, media vans parked bumper to bumper. Reporters hovered near the porch where Evan stood under the awning, rain dripping from his jacket sleeves. Cameras rolled as he spoke into the microphones, voice trembling just enough to sound human. "If she's out there, please let her come home. Lena, if you can hear me, just call." He blinked back tears, and the clip aired on every local channel that evening. Weaver watched it later in his car, parked outside the station, and noted how Evan's eyes never once looked at the camera, only down at the ground. Behind the scenes, tension simmered. Some officers suspected foul play. Others whispered about voluntary disappearance. Weaver wasn't convinced by either. He revisited the Morel home almost daily, methodically reconstructing Lena's final minutes. Keys, purse, kettle, ring missing. He opened every drawer, lifted floor vents, checked behind framed photos. Once, he paused near the kitchen, noticing faint indentations along the tile, as if something heavy had been dragged across the floor. When he asked Evan about it, the man's tone tightened. "We replaced the flooring last year," Evan said. "Old tiles cracked near the sink." Weaver nodded but jotted a note in his pad anyway. "Repairs." Verify date. As the week wore on, public sympathy turned to fatigue. Flyers curled in the rain. Vigils grew smaller each night. Rumors spread that Lena had been having an affair, that she'd run off to the city, that she'd taken money from a hospital fund. None of it held weight, but gossip filled the silence facts left behind. 2 weeks in, the search radius expanded to include abandoned quarries north of town. Officers found remnants of a small campsite, cigarette butts, an empty wine bottle, a burned patch of earth, but nothing linking to Lena. Weaver stood at the edge of the pit as wind scattered ash through the air. "She didn't just vanish," he said quietly to the deputy beside him. "Someone made her disappear." Back in the neighborhood, one resident, Mrs. Hollis, who lived 3 houses down, phoned the tip line. She reported hearing hammering or drilling behind the Morel property around 3 a.m., days after Lena vanished. The noise lasted less than 10 minutes. When questioned, Evan claimed he'd been away at his brother's house that night. His brother confirmed it. The lead was marked low priority and soon buried under dozens of other false alarms. Weaver didn't forget it. In his logbook, he circled the entry twice. Construction noise, 3 a.m., verify, but with no evidence of a site or tools. The note faded among the paperwork. By April, the task force dissolved. Search efforts dwindled to a few volunteers, walking riverbanks more out of habit than hope. The Morel case joined a shelf of unsolved files in the Ashbury precinct basement, the ink of its title already beginning to blur. One evening, as Weaver packed up his office, he caught sight of the case photo pinned above his desk. Lena's smile frozen in a grainy hospital ID shot. He pulled it down, slipped it into his notebook, and stared at the empty space it left behind. Outside, rain began again, tapping against a window like a reminder. Everyone else had moved on. The cameras, the volunteers, the neighbors. But Weaver couldn't. Something in that house, that silence, still spoke to him. Everyone stopped looking when the headlines did. By the end of 2004, Ashbury Creek had gone quiet again. The posters that once lined telephone poles had faded to paper ghosts. The case of Lena Morel, once the town's obsession, had shrunk to a paragraph in an archive binder. After a year of searching, interviews, and unanswered leads, the police department closed the file with weary finality. Detective Cal Weaver signed his last report on a cold November afternoon. Outside, rain traced crooked lines down his office window, the same weather that had marked every turning point of the case. He wrote the final words slowly, as if delaying them might change their meaning. Presumed voluntary disappearance. He hated that phrase. It felt like surrender disguised as procedure. There was nothing voluntary about the look in Lena's eyes from that hospital badge photo. Hopeful, tired, alive. He closed the file, but the story wouldn't let go. In the months that followed, life in Ashbury Creek rearranged itself around absence. Evan Morrell sold the house within 6 months, a private sale to a developer from out of town. When questioned, he said he couldn't live inside that silence anymore. He moved north, remarried, and changed his phone number. Neighbors whispered he'd found peace too quickly. Lena's parents left the state soon after. They stopped attending the memorial services that dwindled each year. "There's no grave to visit," her sister Mara told a local paper. "Only a question we can't bury." The house at 11, Maple Hollow Road, stood empty for a time. Weeds crept up the porch steps. Paint peeled from the shutters, and the windows reflected nothing but clouds. Children dared each other to run to the back fence at night, the one where the search dogs had stopped. People said the new owners never stayed long. They complained of drafts, of creaks and floorboards at odd hours, of tools going missing. By 2007, the property had changed hands 3 times. For Detective Weaver, retirement arrived not as relief but as a sentence. He spent his final weeks boxing up old case files, marking each with a small red C for closed. But when he reached the Morel case, he hesitated. He couldn't bring himself to stamp it. He slipped it into his own briefcase instead, alongside a faded photograph. Lena, smiling from behind her hospital counter, and the worn notebook where he had written a single unresolved note. Construction noise, 3 a.m. He told himself he'd look into it someday, unofficially. But days turned into years, and the line between duty and memory blurred. By the time Weaver moved to his small lake cabin in 2010, he'd stopped carrying a badge, but not the guilt. He still dreamed of the Morel house, sometimes. Always the same dream, a light on the floorboards, faint but pulsing. For the town, Lena became a story people told when the nights grew too quiet. Teenagers whispered theories under the bleachers. True crime forums mentioned her name now and then, another unsolved case swallowed by time. There were theories of a runaway, a jealous spouse, a stalker from the hospital. Each version ended the same way. No body, no proof, no closure. Then, in 2013, a decade after the night Lena vanished, a small online community dedicated to cold cases noticed something uncanny. A user on a photography forum uploaded a grainy vacation photo from a beach in Florida. In the background, blurred but distinct, a woman sat beneath an umbrella, reading. Her profile, her posture, even the birthmark near her collarbone, all matched Lena Morel. The thread exploded overnight. Former neighbors weighed in. An exco worker swore it was her. Someone ran a facial recognition scan and reported a 97% match. The woman in the photo used a different name, Elaine Moore, and her social media trail led nowhere. No records, no address, no confirmed identity. For a moment, it felt like resurrection. Local news picked it up. Old interviews replayed. New theories bloomed. Evan refused to comment. Lena's sister told reporters, "If that's her, I just want to know why she never came home." Detective Weaver, long retired and gray now, sat alone in his cabin when the story reached him. He studied the image on his computer screen, zooming in until the pixels blurred. The eyes were Lena's, he was certain. But the background caught his attention more. A faint reflection in the cafe window beside her. A man's silhouette standing just behind the glass, watching her. He leaned back in his chair, heart heavy. Maybe she had escaped something. Or maybe the story wasn't over, just buried deeper than before. The following morning, Weaver called a contact still active in the department. "You ever hear of a woman named Elaine Moore?" he asked. There was a pause, a click of keys, then a low whistle. "Yeah, there's a file, but it's sealed. Says transfer of identity, witness protection, and something about Ashbury Creek." Weaver's hand tightened around the phone. After 10 years, the silence was cracking open again. The past never really closes. It just waits for someone to reopen the file. By 2023, 2 decades had passed since Lena Morell vanished from Ashbury Creek. The case had drifted into legend, a tragic curiosity discussed on message boards and true crime subreddits, half remembered by a new generation that didn't know her face. But to Rachel Dunn, host of the investigative podcast Buried Voices, the Morell disappearance wasn't just another mystery. It was unfinished business. Rachel specialized in stories that still whispered. She had built her show on forgotten cases and failed investigations, digging through silence with calm, relentless voice that made listeners lean closer. When a fan emailed her the old Ashbury Creek Ledger headline, "Local nurse missing. Case declared voluntary disappearance." Something in her paused. That phrase. It sounded too tidy, too practiced, like a door closed too quickly. She began by reaching out to Detective Cal Weaver, now 80 and living alone near a lake 2 towns over. At first, he refused the interview. "That case still keeps me up," he told her. But when Rachel sent a handwritten letter, respectful, persistent, he called her back 2 weeks later. "If you're going to dig it up," he said, "you better be ready for what's under it." The microphone clicked on in Weaver's kitchen. His voice was slow, gravelly, carrying the weight of years spent chasing ghosts. "We were told to shut it down," he said. Officially, there was nothing left to find. Unofficially, he trailed off. Rachel waited, letting the silence stretch. "There was a noise," he finally said, "from under the house. A hollow sound, like something shifting beneath the floor. I wrote it in my notes, but the chief told me to leave out the final report." Rachel's pen froze. "You mean under the Morell home?" Weaver nodded. "Yeah, crawl space. We thought it was pipes, maybe rats. We never checked. They sealed it before I could." He didn't say who they were, but the bitterness in his tone said enough. Later that week, Rachel drove to Ashbury Creek. The town looked smaller than the photographs, more faded than sinister. The Morell property sat at the edge of the cul-de-sac, surrounded by overgrown weeds and a for demolition sign nailed to the porch. Windows boarded. Mailbox rusted. Yet as Rachel stood at the gate, she felt a pulse of quiet dread, the kind that comes when something still lingers. She recorded her narration on site. 20 years ago, this was a family home. Tonight, it's an echo chamber of everything that wasn't said. They say the house remembers, if you listen closely enough. The wooden boards creaked beneath her feet as she stepped inside. Dust motes drifted through the dim light from a cracked window. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and rust. Old plumbing, old secrets. She traced her fingers along the kitchen wall, where the tiles changed shade mid-pattern, a detail she'd only noticed in photos. "A repair," she murmured into her recorder. But repaired when? In the living room, the wallpaper peeled in thin strips, revealing pale outlines where pictures once hung. Rachel crouched, adjusting her camera. That's when she saw it. Near the back porch, a patch of concrete brighter than the rest, smooth and slightly raised. Fresh. Someone had poured it not long ago. She pressed the edge of her shoe against it. Solid, cold, too deliberate. The rest of the floor sagged with age, but this section felt strong, recent. She took a photo and tagged the coordinates. When she zoomed in later, she noticed faint scrape marks near the perimeter, as if something beneath had shifted before being sealed. Outside, the afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard. A neighbor, an elderly woman sweeping her porch, called out softly, You're the reporter, aren't you? I remember her, Lena. Sweet girl. Never caused trouble. Rachel asked if she'd ever noticed anything strange after the disappearance. The woman nodded. They came one night, trucks and all, said they were checking the foundation, but nobody ever fixed anything. By morning, they were gone and the porch looked different. That night, back in her motel room, Rachel replayed her audio notes. Weaver's words echoed through the static. A noise from under the house. She synced the phrase with her footage from earlier that day. When the camera panned over the concrete patch, her boom mic caught something faint, a low hum beneath the silence, too rhythmic to be wind. Her eyes widened. She turned up the gain, isolating the sound. 3 distinct knocks, soft, uneven, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. Then nothing. Rachel sat back in her chair, pulse quickening. The house remembers, she whispered. She didn't know yet what was buried beneath that porch, only that it had been sealed carefully, purposefully, as if someone believed the truth could be contained forever. But concrete, she knew, couldn't silence everything. Sometimes the truth waits right under the floor we build our lives on. The Morell house had been standing empty for years when the contractor arrived. His crew had been hired to prepare the property for demolition, nothing more. But on the third morning, while pulling up the warped kitchen flooring, one worker's crowbar struck something hollow. A dull, echoing sound, out of rhythm with the rest of the subfloor. They pried up more boards. Beneath them lay a square of concrete slightly off color, smoother than the foundation around it. It took hours to chip through. The moment the final slab cracked open, a foul, earthy air escaped, stale, trapped for years. The foreman, gagging, called for the site manager. Within the hour, the police tape went up again, fluttering in the cold wind, like a ghost returning to its scene. Detective Cal Weaver, now long retired, watched from the sidewalk. He had heard the news from a former colleague who'd uttered only 4 words. They found something, Cal. Against the late afternoon light, the house looked exactly as it had 20 years before. Same roofline, same porch light rusted in place. Time hadn't erased it. It had only sealed what it couldn't explain. Inside the crawl space, crime scene investigators crouched under low beams, flashlights cutting through dust. What they found wasn't full body, but fragments, bone fragments, cloth, and the faded remnants of a floral dress, the kind Lena's sister remembered her wearing on her last weekend off. Next to it lay a small, rusted locket, half buried in soil and plastic sheeting. The engraving was faint but visible under light. LM. The coroner's lab confirmed it 2 days later. DNA from the fragments matched Lena Morell. After 2 decades of rumor and speculation, the missing woman from Ashbury Creek had been found. Not miles away, not buried in woods or rivers, but beneath her own home. The revelation hit the town like an aftershock. Old neighbors appeared on porches again, staring down the block as if expecting her car to reappear. Reporters flooded the cul-de-sac, their microphones trembling in the wind. A discovery 20 years in the making, one anchor announced, as yellow tape swayed behind her. The news spread faster than it had in 2003. For Rachel Dunn, who had documented every step of the reopening, it was the breakthrough her podcast had been chasing. She planned to narrate the episodes, closing with a tone of quiet closure. But closure wasn't what this discovery gave her. It gave her more questions. The locket, when opened, contained a single Polaroid photograph. In it, Lena sat in a sunlit room, smiling faintly. The back of the photo read, in smudged blue ink, March 14th, 2003. 2 days after she was officially recorded missing. Rachel played the photo over and over in her mind, tracing the edges of the image. The timestamp was genuine. The chemical composition of the photo paper matched early 2000s Polaroid stock. But where it was taken remained a mystery. The wallpaper behind Lena didn't match her house or the hospital. It was patterned with muted leaves. The same pattern Rachel would later find in a photo of Motel off Route 9, a place that had closed in 2004. The discovery reactivated everything. The Ashbury County Sheriff's Office reopened the investigation under public pressure. Evan Morell, now remarried and living 3 states away, was summoned for questioning. Cameras followed him from the airport to the precinct. He wore dark glasses, his expression unreadable. When asked for comment, he said only, "I cooperated then and I'll cooperate now." But the calmness in his tone didn't sit right. Rachel, recording from the courthouse steps, noted into her mic, "He's either innocent or he's been rehearsing this line for 20 years. Behind the scenes, forensic teams examined the foundation. The cavity beneath the kitchen appeared deliberately constructed. A sealed chamber, roughly 4 feet deep, lined with polyethylene sheeting and filled with layers of soil. No tools were found nearby, no trace of who poured the concrete, but the style of ceiling matched early 2000s renovation methods. Someone with experience or help had done it. Late one evening, Weaver called Rachel. His voice was tired, brittle. "You said they found her under the kitchen," he said. "Yes." A pause. That's where the noise came from. The one I wasn't supposed to write down. Rachel felt her throat tighten. Weaver had mentioned that sound, hollow, rhythmic, but now it took on new meaning. Whatever had shifted beneath that floor 20 years ago wasn't pipes. It had been her. The next morning, forensic techs called Rachel to view the Polaroid in person. They noticed something she hadn't. In the blurred reflection of a mirror behind Lena, a male figure stood partly visible, holding a camera. The outline of his hand matched Evan's, scar on the thumb, same as old police photos. But if he took the photo, that meant Lena had still been alive after her supposed disappearance, and possibly held somewhere before being buried. Rachel stared at the Polaroid under the lab light, her pulse steady but fast. "Then who poured the concrete?" she whispered. No one answered. The hum of the machines filled the silence, just as it had in that house long ago. Outside, the reporters kept repeating the same phrase over and over. The body of missing nurse Lena Morel has been found, buried beneath her own home. Yet to Rachel, it wasn't an ending. It was a door cracking open, one that led somewhere darker. Because in every story she'd ever covered, the real truth didn't lie with the body. It lay with the person who buried it. And the Polaroid had just told her who was standing behind the camera. Evan Morel sat across from the detectives in the sterile interview room, hands folded neatly, as if posture alone could prove innocence. 20 years had passed since Lena's disappearance, yet his composure hadn't aged a day. The cameras outside clicked like insects, feeding on every expression he gave. He denied everything, calmly, rehearsed. "I had nothing to do with her death," he said. "Lena wasn't well. She'd been talking about leaving for months. Said she wanted to disappear, start over somewhere. She wasn't happy in Ashbury Creek." Detective Vera Collins, heading the reopened case, leaned forward. "Then why didn't she take her purse? Her car keys? Her phone?" Evan's jaw tightened. "She must have come back later." "I don't know. I was at my brother's that weekend. You've all seen the records." The interview lasted 4 hours. Every question came back to the same wall. Time gaps, alibis, deflection. When he finally left the precinct, reporters surrounded him, shouting the same question. "Did you bury your wife?" He didn't answer. He never did. That night, Rachel Dunn sat in her dim studio, headphones on, surrounded by boxes of digitized archives. The flicker of old broadcast footage reflected in her glasses as she scrubbed through Evan's first 2003 television appearance, the one he gave 2 days after reporting Lena missing. He sat on their couch back then, eyes downcast, voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. "She's the kind of woman who lights up a room," he had said. "I just want her home." Rachel paused the frame. Behind Evan, a reflection in the hallway mirror caught her attention. At first, it looked like glare, but as she zoomed in, the shapes clarified. A stack of lumber, a cement mixer, a coiled extension cord, all visible in the reflection behind the living room archway. Construction equipment. On the same night, he told police there had been no repairs taking place. Rachel rewound, replayed, froze again. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it. March 15th, 2003, 3 days after Lena's recorded disappearance. Her pulse quickened. She opened her laptop and typed an inquiry to the Ashbury County Permit Office, requesting construction records for the Morel property. The reply came the next morning. No permits filed or approved for residential repair, modification, or excavation between January and April 2003. No record, no authorization, which meant whatever work had been done on that house, the work that left a body sealed beneath concrete, had been done off the books. Rachel leaned back, staring at the dark screen, listening to the faint hum of her equipment. Somewhere in that silence, she could almost hear Weaver's gravelly voice from their last interview. We were told not to look under the house. She started digging deeper. Bank statements, contractor logs, equipment rentals. One name surfaced again and again. Alan Pike, a freelance construction worker who had disappeared in a car accident 6 months after Lena's case went cold. No witnesses, no foul play suspected. When Rachel requested Pike's employment records, she found one signed invoice billed to E. Morrell for foundation stabilization. Dated March 16th, 2003, the same week Lena vanished. Her breath caught. If that invoice was legitimate, it meant someone had been hired to pour concrete under the Morrell home after the disappearance. But no official permit meant no inspection, no record, a perfect cover. That evening, she recorded a new segment for Buried Voices. According to public records, there were no authorized repairs on the Morrell home in 2003. But I've obtained an invoice suggesting private construction took place days after Lena went missing. The only witness to that work is dead. So the question isn't just what was buried, it's who helped bury it. She paused the recording, the words hanging heavy in the dark. Later, Rachel returned to the 2003 footage one last time. She slowed the frame again, focusing not on the reflection but the faint background audio, the sound of faint thud, rhythmic, metallic. The kind of sound a shovel might make against cement. It lasted 3 seconds before fading beneath the reporter's voice. She sat frozen, replaying it over and over until she no longer knew whether she was hearing a sound or an echo of what she already believed. Outside her window, thunder rolled across the valley. The first storm of the season. Rain lashed against the glass, steady and unrelenting. Rachel turned off the lights, her reflection flickering faintly in the screen. Sometimes, she whispered into her recorder, silence sounds a lot like guilt. The next morning, she would drive to the permit office in person, hoping to find what digital records couldn't show. Signatures, names, dates scrawled in forgotten ledgers. Because if Evan Morrell's house had been built on lies, Rachel was ready to dig them out brick by brick. And somewhere in those missing permits, she suspected, was the name of the man who helped him pour the concrete. The records arrived in a thick manila envelope, edges frayed from years in storage. Rachel Dunn slid the papers onto her desk one by one, her fingers brushing over the faint government watermark. The documents had taken 3 months and a Freedom of Information Act request to obtain. She half expected the file to be empty. It nearly was. Whole paragraphs were blacked out, lines of ink striking through potential truths. But one line, one sentence, survived untouched. Noise from subfloor confirmed. Ordered sealed by Chief on March 18th. Rachel stared at it for a long time. The date, March 18, 2003, was 5 days after Lena Morrell had vanished, and just 2 days before the concrete under her kitchen was poured. The silence between those dates felt deliberate. She called Detective Cal Weaver, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Cal, I have your old notes. There's something you didn't put in the official report." He sighed on the other end, a sound like gravel under boots. "You mean the subfloor entry? So it's real?" "Yeah," he said after a pause. "It's real. We heard something down there. I wanted to check it out, but the chief ordered the site sealed. Said the foundation was unstable, might collapse." Rachel could hear the bitterness behind his words. "And you believe that?" "I was a cop, not a builder," he said quietly. "Orders are orders. But it didn't sit right then, and it sure as hell doesn't now." Rachel pressed. "Why seal the house at all?" "There were politics," he admitted. "That property, the Morrell lot, was part of a development deal, a new housing project. The land was supposed to sell fast once the case died down. Any sign of a crime scene would have scared investors." Rachel's eyes widened. "You're telling me the police covered up evidence to save a real estate deal?" Weaver didn't answer immediately. Let's just say the people funding that project had friends in the department. The same development company financed the chief's retirement home 2 years later. Rachel's pen froze above her notepad. She could feel her pulse in her fingers. "Do you still have your personal notes?" He hesitated, then said, "Somewhere, maybe." "Please, Cal, I need to see them." "Be careful what you dig up, Rachel. Some things were buried for a reason." The line went dead. That night, she sat in her office, surrounded by the smell of old paper and dust. Outside, the storm from earlier in the week had returned, wind thrashing against the windows like a restless memory. She reread the single visible sentence again and again, noise from subfloor confirmed. It wasn't just a note. It was a suppressed piece of evidence. Proof that someone had heard Lena long after the police claimed she'd disappeared. Rachel opened her laptop and searched county archives. The Morrell property had indeed been listed as part of a subdivision expansion in 2004, Ashbury Meadows. The buyer, Hayward Development Group. She scrolled further. The CEO's name surfaced in several local newspaper clippings, shaking hands with city officials at ribbon cuttings. And there, at the bottom of one article, was a familiar name in the caption: Chief Raymond Holt, retired. The same chief who had ordered the excavation halted. Rachel recorded a new voice note for her next episode. The truth about Lena Morrell's disappearance might have less to do with passion or jealousy and more to do with money and silence purchased by those who could afford it. As she spoke, her computer pinged. A new email. The subject line was blank. The sender's address, untraceable. Attached was a single image, a grainy photograph of the Morrell house taken from the backyard. In the lower corner, a red circle marked a section beneath the porch. Beneath it, only one line of text. "You're close." Her breath caught. She turned toward the window instinctively, half expecting to see someone watching from the street below. Only the reflection of rain streaking down the glass stared back. She printed the photo and pinned it above her desk. Beneath it, she placed a copy of the redacted note. The chief's order to seal the subfloor. The two pieces together told a story no one had dared to finish. As midnight neared, Rachel began packing up her things. That's when she noticed an envelope slipped halfway under her door. No postage, no handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a small brass key, cool and heavy, attached to a note written in block letters. "Try the crawl space." Rachel stared at the message, her pulse loud in her ears. The crawl space, the same one Weaver had been told to ignore, the same one that had been sealed, forgotten, buried beneath layers of silence and concrete. She turned the key over in her hand, feeling its sharp edges dig into her palm. Whoever had sent it knew something, maybe everything. In the distance, thunder rolled again, low and deliberate. Rachel looked out the window toward the dark horizon and whispered, "Looks like the house is ready to talk." The night Rachel returned to the Morrell property, the wind carried the smell of rain and rust. The same kind of air, Weaver once told her, that had hung over the town the night Lena vanished. The house loomed in silence, its boarded windows flickering with the red and blue reflections of police tape left from months before. This time, though, Rachel wasn't alone. She arrived with a 2-person camera crew, her producer, and a local contractor who had volunteered to help her navigate the crawl space. They moved quietly, voices low, as if sound itself might disturb whatever still breathed beneath the floor. The brass key from the anonymous envelope rested in Rachel's pocket, its weight both comforting and foreboding. Inside, dust swirled in the beams of their flashlights. The air was heavy, thick with mildew and the faint scent of something metallic. Rachel's boots creaked across warped boards as she traced a familiar path to the back porch. That was where the foundation had been resealed, and where the key was rumored to fit. When the contractor knelt to the hatch, his gloved hands trembling slightly, the lock clicked open with unsettling ease, as though it had been waiting to be turned. The air that rushed out was stale and damp, carrying decades of rot and earth. Rachel crouched beside the opening, peering into the dark space below. "Start rolling," she whispered. The camera's red light blinked to life. The crawl space stretched deeper than expected. Its walls, lined with rough concrete, narrowed into what appeared to be a secondary chamber, something never included in the original floor plan. They descended slowly, ducking under low beams, every breath echoing faintly. At first, it was just dust and debris. But then the beam of Rachel's flashlight caught something sharp, metal glinting against gray stone. It was a folding chair, positioned squarely in the center of the chamber, facing a small box-style television. The TV was old, early 2000s, the kind with a built-in VCR slot. Wires snaked from it into the wall, somehow still connected to power. A low static hum filled the air. The camera operator whispered, "It's still plugging after all these years?" Rachel didn't answer. She could barely breathe. She knelt beside the TV, brushing years of dust from the screen. The static flickered, then steadied. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then an image began to form, a washed-out video, jittering under interference. A room came into focus. Pale walls, patterned wallpaper, soft lamplight. And then Lena Morell. Her face appeared on screen, pale but composed, eyes wide as if she knew exactly who would be watching decades later. She sat in front of the camera, wearing the same floral dress recovered from beneath the house. Her voice was almost a whisper, cracking with fear and resolve. "If you're watching this, I didn't leave." Rachel's breath caught. Behind her, the crew exchanged startled looks. Lena continued, glancing over her shoulder as though expecting someone to walk in at any moment. "He said no one would believe me, that they'd think I ran away. But I didn't. I'm still here." The image stuttered, vertical lines cutting through her face, then returned. "If the noise comes from below, don't open it. That's where he keeps the tapes." Static swallowed her final words. The screen dimmed, then went black. For several seconds, the only sound was a hum of the equipment and the soft rasp of Rachel's breathing. The contractor muttered something under his breath. A prayer, maybe. Rachel reached for the back of the television, fingers brushing against the VCR slot. It was empty. She turned to the crew. "There has to be more than one tape." They searched the chamber, sifting through dirt and fragments of concrete. In one corner, they found a metal storage box, rusted but intact. Inside were 3 VHS cassettes, each labeled in faded black marker. "House Repairs, March 3rd. Rachel stared at the labels, her throat tightening. Repairs. The same word on Alan Pike's invoice. The missing contractor who died months after the case went cold. She lifted one tape carefully, her gloved hand trembling. "We're not playing these here," she said. "We'll do it at the lab." As they prepared to leave, Rachel looked back toward the TV. Its screen had gone dark, but for a brief second, just as the camera panned away, the static flickered once more. The image that flashed was not Lena this time, but a shadowed figure standing behind her, tall, unmoving, half-lit. Then the tape cut out completely. They climbed back up into the night air, gasping as if surfacing from underwater. Rain had started to fall again, a slow, deliberate rhythm against the porch roof. Rachel pressed the key back into her pocket and whispered to herself, barely audible beneath the wind, "The dead don't lie, they record." She turned to the crew, her voice steady now. "Tomorrow we find a way to play those tapes." Back at the forensic media lab, the air hummed with quiet intensity. The 3 VHS tapes Rachel had pulled from the crawl space sat on a sterile metal table, their labels smeared and fading but still legible. House Repairs, March 3rd. Each had been carefully dried, cataloged, and sealed after recovery. Now, under the pale light of the lab, they felt heavier than their size suggested, like they were holding back something that had been waiting to be seen. A technician named Mara Keller, one of the best digital restoration experts in the state, handled the tapes with gloved precision. "They're fragile," she warned, glancing at Rachel. "Could disintegrate on playback." Rachel nodded, her camera rolling. "We'll take it slow." The first tape whirred to life, its grainy image flickering onto the monitor. For a moment, only darkness. Then a sudden beam of light cut through, like a flashlight turning on. The timestamp read March 15th, 2003, 2:46 a.m. 2 figures came into frame. Evan Morell and another man, older, broad-shouldered, wearing a work jacket. They were in the Morell kitchen, the same place where Lena's remains had been found. A camcorder sat propped on a chair, recording as they mixed cement in a wheelbarrow. Evan's voice was faint but distinct. "We just finished this, and no one looks here again." The second man grunted in agreement. The video shook as if the camera had been nudged mid-recording. For several minutes, they worked in silence, shoveling, pouring, smoothing the wet mixture into floors opening. Every sound, from the scrape of the trowel to the echo of boots on concrete, felt amplified, suffocating. When the camera panned briefly, Rachel caught a glimpse of something chilling. A woman's shoe resting against the wall, small and floral patterned. No one acknowledged it. The first tape ended without warning, the screen flooding with static. They moved to the second. March 16th, 2003, 3:12 a.m. The same setting, but this time the camera angle was different, placed lower, closer to the ground. The men were still at work, though Evan appeared more frantic, his voice tense. "We have to seal it tonight," he muttered. "She said she was going to the police." The contractor, later identified as Alan Pike, replied, "Then you shouldn't have let her back in the house." Rachel's breath caught. She leaned closer to the monitor, the glow of the screen washing pale light across her face. The tape continued for another minute before chaos erupted. The sound of a door opening, a woman's voice shouting, distant but sharp. "Lena." Her voice cracked with fear and fury. "Evan, what are you doing?" The camera jolted violently, knocking sideways. For a second, the frame caught her figure, blurred, arms raised, face ghostly under the kitchen light. Then came a crash, a scream, and the hollow thud of something heavy striking the floor. Silence, and then a single breath, trembling uneven, followed by Lena's faint, almost pleading voice. "Please stop." Static filled the rest of the tape. When it finally ended, no one in the lab spoke. The sound of the tape reel, winding down, was the only noise in the room. Rachel pressed her palms against the table to steady herself. "That's it," she whispered. Mara shook her head. "There's one more." The third tape was unlabeled, the handwriting on its sticker half torn away. It began with pure blackness, no timestamp, no audio. "It might be blank," Mara said, but as the footage advanced, faint shapes began to emerge, distorted, flickering like shadows behind fog. "Pause it," Rachel said. "Enhance contrast." Mara ran a digital filter. The image sharpened slightly. At first, it looked like static arranged in vertical lines. Then the lines began to move. There was motion, a slow, deliberate shift, and a dim, human-like outline stepped into frame. No sound accompanied it, only a pulsing distortion, rhythmic, like breathing. "What is that?" one of the texts murmured. Rachel's eyes were locked on the monitor. "Can you isolate the movement?" Mara zoomed in. The frame brightened just enough to reveal something impossible. The faint reflection of a face in the corner of the screen, half lit, watching the camera from the darkness. Not Lena's, not Evan's, someone else. Before they could analyze further, the image glitched, the tape buckling inside the machine. The lab filled with the mechanical whine of film snapping. Smoke rose faintly from the VCR's vents. The footage was gone. Rachel sat in stunned silence. The faint smell of burnt tape hung in the air. "Was any of it salvageable?" she asked. Mara shook her head. "Maybe the first few seconds, but whatever was on that tape, someone didn't want it seen." Rachel stared at the now silent screen, her reflection pale against the black glass. Somewhere in that lost footage was a missing piece, the one person who had helped Evan bury Lena, maybe even recorded the whole thing. And if the outline on the tape wasn't Evan or Lena, then someone else had been inside that house. She turned to her microphone recorder, pressed record, and whispered the next episode's line. Sometimes what we find in the dark isn't meant for the living. But in her chest, a question was forming, one that would drive her deeper than ever before. Who was behind the camera the night Lena died? The morning after the tapes disintegrated in the lab, Rachel sat in her apartment surrounded by files, receipts, and half-drained coffee cups. Sleep hadn't come. The image of that shadowed face in the final recording refused to leave her. But instinct told her it wasn't over, that the footage was only one layer of something much larger. She turned back to her screen, digging through property tax ledgers and archive payment histories. Every digital trail she followed seemed to lead back to the same name, Hayward Development Group, the company that had purchased the Morrell lot in 2004. The same one Weaver had mentioned months ago, tied to real estate projects all across Ashbury Creek. One invoice in particular caught her attention. It listed E. Morrell as a recipient of a direct transfer, $22,400 labeled Foundation Stabilization Reimbursement. The date, March 20th, 2003, the exact week Lena vanished. Rachel's pulse quickened. She cross-checked the transaction, tracing it back through a series of holding accounts until the final source emerged, a trust registered under the name of Police Chief Raymond Holt. Her breath caught. The same man who had ordered the excavation halted. She opened a new voice memo for her upcoming episode. It wasn't just Evan Morrell. The money that sealed that floor came from the same company that financed the chief's retirement home. A house buried, paid for, and forgotten, literally built on silence. Rachel needed confirmation. She drove 2 hours north to find Cal Weaver, the retired detective whose conscience had never fully let go. His lakeside cabin looked smaller than she remembered, its porch light flickering weakly against the fog. Weaver answered the door in a worn sweater, eyes tired but alert, as if he'd been expecting her. "I found the payment records," Rachel said without preamble. Evan's renovations were funded by Hayward Development, the same people tied to Holt. Weaver's shoulders sagged. "I knew it," he murmured. "But you need to understand, Holt wasn't just a name on the report. He owned shares in the land deal. Half the department did. The Morrell lot was just one piece of it." Rachel set down her recorder. "So you were told to close the case to keep the project alive?" Weaver met her gaze, guilt etched in every line of his face. "They called it a community expansion. They said the town needed the revenue. When I wrote the word suspicious in my draft report, Holt made me take it out, told me to change it to voluntary disappearance. He said it was cleaner." Rachel's voice softened. "Cleaner for who?" Weaver looked away, toward the mist-covered lake. "For everyone who got paid." After a long silence, he disappeared into a back room. When he returned, he was carrying a weathered cardboard box marked in red ink, Site B-12. Dust clung to its corners like old guilt. "These were never filed," he said quietly, setting it before her. "Photos from another dig. Same company. Same kind of foundation as the Morrell place. Only difference is those lots were never sold." Rachel lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of photographs, concrete slabs, each identical in design, laid out across empty plots of land at the edge of town. Beneath several images, Weaver had scrawled notes in faded pencil. "Unlisted site, permit missing, no inspection log. There are at least 12 of them," he said. "All sealed before they were ever built on." Rachel flipped through the pictures, her fingers trembling slightly. Each slab looked disturbingly uniform. Same dimensions, same alignment of support beams, same pale concrete mixture, like copies of the Morrell Foundation stamped across the map. "What were they hiding?" she asked. Weaver hesitated. "Bodies, money, evidence, maybe all three. I don't know. But whatever Hayward was doing, the chief made sure it never hit paper." Rachel took one photograph from the stack, a lot labeled B-12, the dirt around it freshly leveled. At the corner of the image, a shovel leaned against a post marked with bright red spray paint. X. She looked up at Weaver. "Do you still have the coordinates for these sites?" He nodded slowly. "In the box. But, Rachel, if you start digging into this, you'll find more than cover-up. You'll find the people who paid to keep it quiet." She packed the photos carefully into her satchel, her mind already racing ahead to what came next. If those slabs were built like the Morrell Foundation, what, or who, had been sealed beneath them? As she stood to leave, Weaver said softly, "You asked me once why I never reopened the case. Truth is, I was scared of what I'd find." Rachel paused at the door, the box under her arm, rain beginning to fall outside. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "But fear isn't the same as silence." Driving back toward town, headlights slicing through the mist, Rachel replayed Lena's words from the recovered tape in her mind. "If you're watching this, I didn't leave." Maybe Lena's death had never been about a single home or marriage, but a network of buried truths stretching across Ashbury Creek, each one hidden under a fresh layer of concrete. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Tomorrow, she'd start with Site B, 12. How many homes were built over someone's silence? The arrest came on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that smelled like rain and endings. Evan Morrell was let out of his suburban home in handcuffs as news vans swarmed the street. His new wife watched from the doorway, stunned, clutching a robe to her chest. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes burst through the drizzle, and the words linked by DNA echoed to the crowd like a verdict before trial. Forensic analysts had matched microscopic skin cells embedded in the plastic sheeting beneath Lena's remains to Evan. The discovery was enough for an arrest warrant. Though everyone knew it was only the beginning, Rachel watched the footage of her office, headphones around her neck. Her reflection ghosted over the paused image of Evan being pushed into the police cruiser. He didn't fight, didn't speak. He simply turned his head slightly, as if looking for the nearest camera, and smiled. It wasn't relief or remorse. It was recognition. That night, Rachel recorded the final interview of her series with Detective Cal Weaver. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and whiskey, the light from a single lamp soft against his lined face. He looked older than she remembered, as though each new truth had carved him deeper. "You were right," he said quietly. "The money trail was the key. Always is." Rachel pressed record. "Tell me what really happened back then. Why cover up her death?" Weaver's hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. Because the town was broke. The contractors promised revenue, jobs, new homes. Holt, the chief, had debt up to his neck. So did the mayor. Lena's house was the first lot in that expansion zone. When she died, they panicked. A body meant no sale, no development, no payoff. So they buried her, literally, to protect their investment, Rachel said. Weaver nodded. Evan's motive was personal. Insurance, debt, desperation. But the cover-up? That was bigger. The chief sealed the report. Hayward Development paid off the cleanup. And He stopped, staring at the fire. "I signed the paperwork that let it disappear." Rachel leaned forward, her voice low. "You didn't bury her, Cal." "I buried the truth," he whispered. 2 days later, news broke that Cal Weaver had died in his sleep. The coroner's note said cardiac arrest, but the story didn't end there. His cabin burned down that same night. The fire ruled electrical, though neighbors swore they'd seen headlights in the woods before the flames. Rachel drove there the next morning. All that remained was ash and twisted metal. The air smelled like smoke and something else, the sharp, sterile scent of loss. She found nothing salvageable except a half-melted flash drive buried under the debris. When she brought it to a technician, they confirmed what she'd already suspected. The drive contained partial video files, fragments of the original tapes. But when she returned to the evidence locker to compare them, she discovered the tapes were gone. Misfiled, the clerk said, refusing to meet her eyes. "We're looking into it." Misfiled, she repeated under her breath. It was the same word the department had used 20 years earlier about Lena's missing case notes. That night, Rachel sat alone in her studio, staring at the blinking red light on her recorder. Her story had become a circle, one where truth was always just beyond reach. She hit record. Lena Morrell's case began with silence, and it ends the same way. The tapes have vanished from police custody. Detective Weaver, the last living witness, is gone. But the facts remain. Money changed hands, files were falsified, and a woman's life was traded for a patch of concrete. Her voice trembled only once as she continued. The truth may not fit into an evidence box, but leaves its fingerprints on everyone who touched it. The next morning, Buried Voices. The Ashbury case went live. The episode named every person involved. Evan Morrell, Chief Holt, Hayward Development, and the city officials who profited from the sale. Within hours, it trended nationwide. Listeners flooded the comment section with outrage, sympathy, and theories. The town of Ashbury Creek, long forgotten, was suddenly back under a spotlight it couldn't escape. Rachel barely slept that night. The satisfaction she'd expected never came. Instead, there was only unease, the sense that something unfinished still pulsed beneath the surface. Around midnight, she rose to get water. That's when she noticed an envelope, cream-colored, unmarked, slipped under her apartment door. Her heart jolted. She crouched, hands trembling as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. You only found one body. Rachel stared at the words until her breath fogged the page. The edges of the paper smelled faintly of smoke, like it had come from the same fire that took Weaver's cabin. She lifted her head slowly, eyes sweeping the dark hallway beyond the door. No sound, no footsteps, only the low hum of the city outside. But in the reflection of the glass window behind her, she thought she saw movement, the faint silhouette of someone standing across the street, watching. Her pulse thundered. She grabbed a recorder and whispered the next line, voice low but steady. Sometimes the dead aren't done talking. The morning the demolition crews arrived, Ashbury Creek felt quieter than it had in years. The air was still, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. The old Morrell house, stripped, hollow, and condemned, still like a shell of guilt waiting to collapse. Bright orange machinery lined the street, their engines idling over the hum of distant thunder. Rachel watched from across the road, camera in hand, raincoat pulled tight around her shoulders. She covered enough crime scenes to know closure rarely came with a headline. Still, part of her wanted this to be the end, the final chapter of a town that had built its foundations on lies. The foreman gave the signal, and the first strike of the excavator's claw tore into the floorboards. The sound echoed like a groan through the valley. Splintered wood and concrete dust filled the air. Within hours, the structure that had guarded 2 decades of silence was nothing but rubble. But when the debris was cleared, the crew found something the blueprints didn't account for, a deeper cavity beneath the foundation, sealed off by another layer of concrete. Rachel's heart quickened. She moved closer as workers called for the county coroner. The dig resumed, slower this time, shovels scraping cautiously through the damp soil. Then came a shout. "Stop. There's something here." She pressed record. The camera zoomed in as a gloved hand brushed away earth, revealing the curve of bone. Not one set, 2. One adult, smaller frame, and beside it, a child skeleton, hand resting over the adult's ribs as if in some final instinct to hold on. A hush fell over the site. Even the machines seemed to go still. The coroner's preliminary report, issued hours later, dated the remains to the early 1980s, long before Lena Morrell had ever lived there. The discovery redrew every theory. The Morrell home hadn't been cursed by coincidence. It had been chosen, built atop something that was already buried. Rachel's phone buzzed nonstop. News outlets wanted statements, interviews, updates. The story exploded. Second set of bodies found under former crime scene. Ashbury Creek, once a dot on the map, was suddenly the headline of every national feed. She sat in her car, voice recorder on, rain tapping against a windshield as she began her final narration. For 20 years, this house was believed to hide one secret. But today, the ground beneath it spoke again. 2 more lives buried decades before Lena tell us that Ashbury Creek's darkness didn't begin in 2003. It began much earlier, and it was never just one man's crime. She paused, looking out at the empty lot through the streaks of rain. The town's timeline was unraveling. 1980s, 2003, 2023. Each layer of dirt revealing a different generation of silence. County archives confirmed the property had changed hands 3 times before the Morrells. The first owner, a construction foreman named Gerald Pike, had died in an accident in 1984. His last name caught Rachel's attention. Pike, the same as Alan Pike, the contractor who'd helped Evan pour concrete 20 years later. Father and son, the connection tightened like a noose. It meant the ground beneath the Morrell house wasn't just a grave. It was an inheritance. Rachel spent the next 2 days tracing property deeds, death certificates, and old blueprints. Each discovery drew her deeper into the same pattern. Every development project tied to Hayward Development Group. Every foundation poured on soil that had once been sealed. She recorded the closing of her final episode late, that night in near darkness, her voice barely above a whisper. Ashbury Creek never stopped building. Every home here rests on a quiet pact to forget, but concrete doesn't erase. It only preserves. What's buried doesn't stay gone. It waits. For a long moment, Rachel said nothing. The tape rolled, capturing the faint sound of rain and her steady breathing. Finally, she ended with the words that would close her series. Some towns don't bury secrets. They live on them. When the episode aired, the world reacted with fascination and horror. Former residents wrote in, confessing things they'd seen as children. Trucks at night, unmarked deliveries, voices in the dirt. Investigators reopened cases once thought unrelated. For Ashbury Creek, there would be no return to quiet. Weeks later, the demolition site remained fenced off, an empty lot surrounded by wild grass. Rachel returned one last time with her camera crew, intending to film the final scene of her documentary. As the rain began to fall again, she stood in silence, letting the lens capture the empty ground, the place where truth and soil had finally met. She whispered her outro line softly, almost to herself. Case closed officially, but the ground still moves. And as the crew packed their equipment, the microphone picked up something faint. So faint it might have been imagined, a soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from deep beneath the wet earth. Rachel turned her head toward the sound, eyes narrowing. It was gone as quickly as it came. But for a brief, breathless moment, everyone on that lot stopped moving, listening. Because somewhere under Ashbury Creek, something or someone was still trying to be heard. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.